they'll be joining, they'll be leaving, they'll be joining based on their session. So we have two links going simultaneously.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sir,
sir.
I must.
Yeah, you are audible and you are visible. Please continue,
Yeah, yeah.
sir.
Thank you, sir. And
We'll not be
I think
disturbing you. You can continue, sir. Thank you, sir.
a very good morning to the esteemed chairpersons, the delegates, and my dear postgraduates. I just bring in greetings from Department of General Surgery, Gandhi Medical College, and I have the great privilege of starting this conference with an interesting topic on benign breast diseases. But this is not me, what you're seeing on the slide, but definitely I'm in that state of confusion. The reason for this particular confusion is I'm dealing with an epidemic of diagnosis. That is what the benign breast disease is often referred to. And looking at the voluminous load of diseases which are basically are under this entity, I am little surprised whether it would be possible for me to complete this in that stipulated time of 15 minutes. But the other major cause of confusion, and I'm sure that this confusion exists in the minds of most of the, the practitioners and the postgraduates, this is with regards to the heterogeneous diseases which are basically are categorized under these benign breast diseases, and the very clinical presentation which we often come across in these patients. The biggest challenge would be the terminology related to these, because it's not one name, there are multiple names. And imagine, suppose if you have been having two names, how much confusion it can create in the mind of a person who's trying to reach you. And of course, I think when we get exhausted with all the investigations pertaining to this benign breast disease and still we are not able to arrive at a diagnosis, that's a bigger challenge and concern. And in that process, sometimes you might overtreat these particular conditions. The biggest problem what we face with benign breast diseases is we do not have standardized treatment protocols and scientific evidence actually in the management of these particular diseases. So that's the reason why there is confusion. But I always believe that confusion can lead to clarity. So to take you through this journey of benign breast disease, I have a few outlines of my presentation where I would like to probably make the concepts little more clear regarding the terminology, that is aberration of normal development and evolution. A word of caution regarding not to over-evaluate and over-treat these particular conditions. That's something which is very important. And of course, the need for risk stratification and surveillance. But please remember, do not over-assurance, don't give over-assurance for these particular patients, because they definitely carry a certain risk of, they certainly carry a risk of malignancy. So when we would like to classify, because this is something important for you to understand that, so the classification can be something as simple as congenital, neoplastic, traumatic, or inflammatory, or it can be little more complicated when we are talking about with regards to the clinical features. It varies from physiological to mastalgia with lumps and without lumps, and of course, nipple discharge and infections. But the most important thing what I just would like to probably consider is a classification which is based on pathological features, because this also gives you an appropriate risk associated with this particular benign breast diseases. When you look at this classification, they're broadly classified into non-proliferative lesions and proliferative lesions. And of course, the proliferative lesions are again with and without atypia. When you look at the left-hand column, I'm sure that cysts and fibroadenomas are quite common in your practice, and I'm sure that we would consider them as benign condition, though there's a very little risk associated with these. Whereas the proliferative lesions and the most common lesions what we come across in this category is the moderate and florid epithelial hyperplasia, intraductal papillomas, and sclerosing adenosis, which carry a relative risk of 1.5 to 2. But of course, those lesions with atypical ductal or lobular hypoplasia has a significant relative risk of 4 to 5. I think this is important, which we need to probably consider while managing this particular patient. Again, to re-emphasize, triple assessment is been a gold standard for the evaluation of any breast lump, whether it is a malignancy or a benign breast disease. So what is important in this, we need to have a thorough, a comprehensive clinical examination. Of course, it has to be followed by a radiology. So what is commonly practiced is ultrasound and mammography. And looking at the dense breasts these patients have, so obviously the most common modality which you would like to probably use is an ultrasound. If you have some doubt and if there are certain atypical features which can make you suspect, probably we can go for an MRI. But believe me, this is a highly sensitive investigation. False positive rates are quite high. So you need to be very cautious while you're trying to use an MRI. And of course, it has to be followed by a non-surgical excision biopsy. And I would always insist on a core biopsy rather than FNAC. FNAC has a very limited role, particularly in the management of a simple cyst, where it can be both diagnostic as well as therapeutic. But I think ideal would be a core biopsy, and when needed, selectively, we can think about going for a vacuum-assisted biopsy. So again, I just reinforce, this is something which you need to probably practice when you're evaluating a breast disease. The greatest advantage what we have now because of this particular Cardiff clinics concept is a terminology which has been creating a lot of confusion, has more or less clarified. And now we have what is called as aberration of normal development and involution, where we have normal, disorder, and disease. So it's basically to make sure that how we would like to go about managing this. Looking at this slide, an important slide, we just want to apply this concept to the various phases of breast development. As you're all aware, breast development has two phases. One is evolution and involution. When it comes to evolution, we have the early reproductive phase and the late reproductive phase. So it's very common to have these changes, and they are all considered normal, particularly with regards to this early reproductive phase. You might have a fibroadenoma which is less than 1 centimeter, but this is considered to be normal. But if you have a fibroadenoma which ranges between 1 to 3 centimeters, it is a disorder, whereas the counterpart of it, where you would like to probably consider it as a disease, it has to be more than 5 centimeter, and it is often referred to as a giant fibroadenoma. Again, during the late reproductive phase, cyclical changes are very common, but when it is associated with cyclical mastalgia, nodularity, and nipple discharge, probably you would like to consider this as a disorder. But incapacitating mastalgia need to be considered as a disease. When it comes to the involution phase, there are two types of involution, the duct and the lobular involution. So what you get in the duct involution is mostly the macrocyst, whereas the lobular involution can give rise to sclerosing adenosis. Duct ectasia is mostly related to duct involution, and the counterpart of this basically referred to as a periductal mastitis and abscess. And of course, we have epithelial hypoplasia with atypia. Coming to this early reproductive phase, and the commonest thing what we come across is a fibroadenoma. So this is a basic unit of a breast, that is a terminal ductal lobular unit, and an hypoplasia of this would result in a fibroadenoma. And this is something which is very common, and we have different types where you would like to classify them into pericanalicular and intracanalicular. And again, we have some special types, juvenile and giant fibroadenomas. But please remember, these are mostly benign. And if you want to decide the management, I think we need to look at these two entities. One is simple, the complex. Complex doesn't mean that it has to be associated with some atypical hyperplasia. Complexity means that it could have been a fibroadenoma which has recurred multiple times, or it could be a fibroadenoma which is manifested at a late stage, or it could be a patient with fibroadenoma with a positive family history. So this is the only one where you need to be cautious about. Otherwise, the management would be very simple and easy. So this is the algorithm. Please remember, as I've already said, something less than 1 centimeter need to be considered normal. Something between 1 to 3 centimeters need to be followed up, because most of these are likely to stabilize within a period of 1 to 2 years. And of course, when you have a tumor which is more than 5 centimeters, it definitely needs excision, because there is a thin line between a giant fibroadenoma and a Pilot's tumor. And if you are probably would do a simple excision, there's a high chance that this particular tumor is going to recur. And multiple recurrence can lead to a malignancy. So as you're all aware, this is basically a tumor which is associated with stromal hyperplasia. The typical features would be a bosselated surface, local warmth, dilated veins, and skin necrosis because of the pressure. Cystic and solid areas are something which are very typical of Pilot's. And fortunately, we have this 80 to 85% of these tumors being benign. So that's a great advantage we have. But it's very, very difficult to differentiate a benign from borderline and malignant. So that is the reason most of the times we end up doing a wide local excision, anticipating a recurrence. But suppose you have a tumor which has been quite big, occupying the breast, the option would be a subcutaneous mastectomy, and multiple recurrences might make you forced to go for a simple mastectomy. Coming to the late reproductive phase, I think we need to be worried about this lumpy, bumpy breast disorder. A very big challenge for a surgeon to treat. It's very difficult to manage these particular disorders because they're most often associated with cyclical mastalgia and nodularity, where the patient is quite apprehensive about a possible malignancy. Microscopically, you have a lot of changes, but what I just want you to understand is if this is associated with florid hypoplasia or multiple papillomatosis, this is the one which you need to be careful about, and probably you need to manage this patient with a close follow-up. And please remember, these can be a precursors for a possible malignancy in future. Something which is associated with mastalgia is a biggest challenge for us, and particularly when there is no nodularity or a mass, it would be more difficult us to convince these particular patients. There's a big list of drugs, and I'm not sure how they are going to work, and it's basically we would try to experiment on this patient, but a word of caution that we need to be careful when you are starting these drugs because they're most often associated with a lot of side effects. But if you're fortunate, but if you have been a very good husband and you had an opportunity where you could convince your wife, I'm sure that you would be able to become a very popular breast surgeon convincing your patient. The rest of the things are basically a palliative where probably would get benefit of pain relief with these medications. Coming to the discharges from nipple, the greatest concern would be blood coming from the nipple. But fortunately, majority of these bloody discharges are associated with a benign lesion like papilloma. It's only 10% of these cases are associated with malignancy. So that's one good thing about a bloody discharge from the nipple. So it depends on whether it is a single papilloma or multiple papillomatosis, which is going to decide the treatment. And coming to the elderly population at the phase of involution, where you expect the ductal involution and the lobular involution. So these cysts, a simple cyst or a complicated cyst or a complex cyst are very common in this particular phase. And we would be very happy to look at a simple cyst. But when it comes to a complex cyst, this has to be probably taken care of. And whenever you come across a cyst, I think the simple thing is just to aspirate. And if it is a clear fluid, it all depends on the institute protocol, whether you would like to subject this for a cytology or not. But the concern would be when you have a bloody aspirate from the cyst, and if there is a residual mass after aspiration. So these are the ones where you need to go for a biopsy and you need to have a very close follow-up. So that is about the management of a cyst. And duct ectasia is something, again, a very important thing. It's one of the causes for non-lactational breast abscess where you're going to see in the subareolar region. And you all know that there is a ductal dilatation with the extravasation of the fluid into the periductal tissues, resulting in mastitis, abscess, fistula, and fibrosis. And of course, it all depends on whether it is a single duct or a multiple ducts, and excision would be the treatment if it is multiple ducts, or it could be a microdocotomy, which you can contemplate if it's a single duct. Coming to those lesions, rare lesions, benign proliferative lesions, where you are likely to have a relative risk of 1.5 to 2, are these sclerosing adenosis, complex sclerosing lesions, and radial scars. And some of these can be detected only on a mammogram. And the next would be an atypical ductal or lobular hypoplasia, which you need to be worried about because these are likely to transform into ductal carcinoma in situ or a lobular carcinoma in situ, and finally they end up in an invasive cancer. So these are the ones which are going to have a very high risk, and obviously we need to have a careful follow-up, and wide excision would be the treatment of choice for these particular patients. Coming to inflammatory disease, which is more common among the lactating women. And of course, abscess is a very common manifestation in these particular patients. And when we have different types of abscesses, subareolar abscess, an intramammary abscess, and a retromammary abscess. So one word is, I think, one word of caution is we have been doing incision and drainage quite frequently among these particular patients who present with lactational breast abscess. I think we need to change our mindset and we need to probably think about aspirating these abscesses using your ultrasound. I think this needs to be a standard protocol in the management of abscess, because by doing an incision and drainage, you are trying to distort the architecture of the breast, and most of these patients can land up in mammary fistula. A word about antibioma: please do not start antibiotics without drainage approach. That's a basic surgical principles, and ultimately sometimes you can end up in a condition called as antibioma. This is something rare, but I think this is again a big challenge for a surgeon trying to deal with the tuberculosis of the breast. And of course, we need to establish the diagnosis before we start the treatment. But what is very worrisome and what is very difficult is idiopathic granulomatous mastitis. It's very difficult to establish the diagnosis because we are not very sure about the etiology. And you all know, when you don't know the cause, you would like to say it is autoimmune. And the most common treatment to which it responds is steroid. But a word of caution: please exclude tuberculosis before starting steroids, because the tuberculosis can flare up if you are putting the patient on steroids. So that's an important thing which you need to take care of. Traumatic fat necrosis is only for completion's sake because it presents as a hard lump which is painless and it can mimic malignancy. So again, don't ignore these benign conditions. You always need to be careful and try to evaluate these patients carefully before you rule out a possibility of malignancy. So finally, to conclude, actually, on one fine day, there were 4 doctors who ventured for a duck hunting. So they were trying to search for a duck, and this was a group of radiologists, pathologists, went for a certain distance, then they could see an animal, but they were not very sure what it was, whether it was a duck or something else. So the first person who could spot was a radiologist. And when he spotted, he said, it looks like a duck, but cannot rule out a bald eagle. Clinical correlation needed. That's what most of the times you see radiologists saying. The next person would be a pathologist. Even the pathologist was not very sure. He said, I'm not very sure. Give me some time. I'll get back to you in a week. Then we had our internist. He was also very not sure about whether it was a duck or some other animal. He said, I need to refer it to a specialist to make sure whether it is a duck or something else. And then we had a real hero, a surgeon. He just took out his gun and fired a shot at the duck, and the duck died. And he just picked it up and said, yeah, it's a duck. So what I just want to tell you is, this particular story relates to a benign breast disease. You're a hero. I know that you are very aggressive in management, but this particular does not hold good with benign breast diseases, where you need to be more conservative, where you need to be more concerned, and where we need to be more compassionate. So what I just believe is treatment should not be worse than the disease. So that's the message I just want to leave behind. And I would like to thank the organizers for giving this opportunity and the TS ASICON. So thank you very much, and I hope I have completed it on time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. N. Reddy, sir. The chairpersons would like to ask any questions, sir. Krishna Mohan, sir. Subramanian. Otherwise, we'll go on to Professor Dio.
Dr. N.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Professor Dio,
sir.
Mohandas, sir.
That is, yeah. How do you manage the florid fibroadenosis? Because it's creating a lot of problem for surgeons.
At least we have managed, sir, with my experience, because I have not done a mastectomy or a prophylactic mastectomy for a patient, though it's been reported in the literature. Majority of them have been managed conservative only. So I'm not had any experience trying to do some surgery which might probably elevate the symptoms.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Because I think Mohan, NBN has a point. Any major resection on the breast is equally painful, because breast is mastectomy is a procedure with which induces chronic pain syndrome, which is untreatable. It can only be endured, and the patient has to accommodate and adjust to it. So the treatment itself is extremely painful for a lifetime. So I think aggressive surgical management is not the order. What is important is to keep on reassuring. They'll keep changing doctors, but I think you should not change your line of treatment. Let them change. You don't change.
But sometimes the pathology is present as a atypical cells also seen. And then many cases they are landed with malignancy also. That's the problem.
That's when that's when you must excise and show them that the report is negative.
Okay.
That will reassure them. Yeah,
Because-
biopsy can be reassuring. There's no doubt. Biopsy is not a problem, but mastectomy is too much of a feat.
Yeah. Biopsy to confirm the disease.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Subbu. Thank you for your comments.
Thanks, Jagu, for the
Thank you, sir. Environment sir. We'll shift to
Thank you,
Professor
sir.
Dio, sir. Professor Dio, sir, is the head of Department of Surgery, as I told earlier. So, Dio, sir,
Yes.
can you please share your screen, sir? And
Yeah.
delegates can ask Q&A chat box is there. They can paste their questions, and we will check up and ask the speakers when time is there. So, Professor Dio, sir, thank you very much, sir, for accepting our invitation. It's a great honor to have you here, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Good morning. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, very clear, and your screen is also
My
seen,
slides
sir.
is also there. Okay. At the outset, I would like to thank the PS Asicon for giving me this opportunity. And namaskaram to all the distinguished surgeons of Hyderabad, all the students, delegates. I bring greetings from All India Institute, New Delhi. I'm very happy to share my experience on breast cancer therapy with the distinguished delegates from Hyderabad, and I'm happy to see Dr. Raghu, Dr. Subramanian Sudhar, Dr. Jagdish Gaur, and all senior surgeons here. So I have been asked to cover the breast conservation therapy, one of the important topics in the field of breast cancer. As you all can see, the pink symbolizes breast cancer. This is the recent world map from breast cancer perspective. If you see, now breast cancer has replaced all other cancers as the most common cancer among women in 140 countries out of 184 in the world. The entire global, if you see the statistics, the Globocon 2018, it is the most common cancer, rapidly rising cancer. Coming to Indian scenario, which is one of the leading cancers among women in India right now, there is a 40% increase between 1990 and 2016 in incidence of breast cancer. And currently we see around 1.18 thousand cases every year, and the prevalence is around 5.5 lakhs. This is the recent global burden of disease study. If you see state-wise, we have all the states of India in the top. The breast cancer is ranking either 1 or 2 in most of the cancer registries or from the data from all the states. The breast cancer has replaced cervical cancer in most of the states in India. Now it is ranking either the number 1 or number 2, followed by cervical cancer and gastric cancer. If you look at the evolution of breast cancer surgery, you all are aware, I think we started with radical mastectomy of the Halsted era. Currently, we have reached a stage of breast conservation and sentinel node biopsy. You see on the right side, this is what we try to offer to most of the breast cancer patients if they come to a breast clinic or a good a comprehensive cancer center in time. These are the timelines. Mastectomy stood the test of time for almost 100 years. It was started in 1894, the radical mastectomy, and breast conservation was introduced in 1980. For 100 years, radical mastectomy was the mainstay of surgical management of breast cancer. Then in the last 20 years, we have seen introduction of a number of surgical procedures for breast cancer, including sentinel node biopsy, oncoplasty, disc radiation surgery, reconstructions. So it took almost 100 years to replace mastectomy with breast conservation therapy. That is the kind of progress you see the timelines. Coming to breast conservation therapy, it is a major success story of the modern multimodality management in the field of oncology. Oncology is about multimodality management, and breast cancer and especially breast conservation therapy was the best example of multimodality therapy being tried in a scientific way. It laid the foundation for multimodality therapy. It laid the foundation for randomized controlled trials in the field of surgical oncology. Started with innovative pilot studies in 60s, retrospective comparative studies in 70s, a big randomized control studies in 1980s, and now we have more than 20 or 25 years follow-up data available for breast conservation therapies. So these are the landmark trials comparing breast conservation with modified radical mastectomy. If you look at the 10-year survival and local recurrence, they are comparable. So all these studies have proven if you take a suitable patient, the outcomes of breast conservation are comparable to mastectomy. Now we have 20 years follow-up data available, which have been published in NEJM and Cancer. Now, if you see the local relapse rates, MRM versus BCT 2 and 2.3%. Overall survival is almost equal, 60 versus 60%. So this proves in a selected patients, a good group of patients, breast conservation outcomes are equivalent to mastectomy. So there's no doubt about it. So this led to a consensus statement way back in 1991. Breast conservation is the treatment choice, not only equivalent to mastectomy, but also preferable for early stage breast cancer. This has been proclaimed in 1991, but we are in 2020 right now. So despite availability of level 1 evidence favoring breast conservation therapy, there are wide disparities in the breast conservation rates globally. Very low rates of breast conservation are reported from middle and low income countries, and the reasons are multifactorial. If you look at the global mastectomy rates, the Western Europe and North America, mastectomy rates currently are around 30 to 40%. So 60 to 70% is the breast conservation rate. When you come to Asia and Africa, almost 90% of the patients undergo mastectomy. So there are multiple reasons. If you see the mastectomy rates, we just concentrate on the green line, that is the American data, SEER database. Currently around 30 to 40% is the mastectomy rate. That means 60% undergo breast conservation. Then focus on the blue line, that is European data. Majority undergo breast conservation. So what are the reasons for low breast conservation in developing countries? We have various patient-related factors, physician-related factors, and resource-related factors. We need to address all of them if you want to bring back breast conservation therapy as a main treatment modality for breast conservation. Patient-related factors, as you all know, includes lack of education and awareness, delayed presentation, socioeconomic factors. Mastectomy is treated as a simple and quick solution, and BCT is considered a prolonged therapy, involves cost factors. Cultural and gender issues. Women are not stakeholders in decision making. Most of the time, when you decide what treatment to be offered to the patient, somebody else in the family takes the decision for the women. It is not the woman who is affected. It is the father-in-law or the mother-in-law or somebody else decides we would like to go for a mastectomy. Belief systems. Most of the doctors, including leave alone patients, a lot of physicians still think breast conservation increases local recurrence. Physician-related factors. Physician bias is the major contributing factor for low breast conservation because we lack a structured referral system in oncology. It's free for all system. There's lack of multidisciplinary treatment approach. There's lack of oncology background in most of the practice centers and lack of surgical exposure and training to breast conservation therapy during your residency. If the residents are exposed to some breast conservation therapy during their training, they would like to follow the same when they go to practice. So majority advocate mastectomy for the sake of convenience. And there are also certain myths and misconceptions among Indian physicians saying that acceptance of mastectomy is better among Indian patients. Indian patients are not keen for BCT or breast reconstruction. Main concern of Indian patients is control of cancer. Quality of life is not an issue. These are all myths. There's no scientific evidence. And BCT increases local recurrence. The truth is, majority of the Indian patients are neither counseled nor offered for breast conservation or reconstruction. I'm talking of the majority. Resource related, yes, these are common issues we face all over India. A lack of multidisciplinary comprehensive cancer centers, quality radiology services, pathology services, limited access to radiation therapy. So for the sake of postgraduates, what is breast conservation therapy? Breast conservation therapy is separate from breast conservation surgery. So the breast conservation therapy includes a breast conservation surgery, which is a wide local excision, along with axillary lymph node resection or sentinel node biopsy. So this is called breast conservation surgery, which is followed by postoperative radiotherapy, either a whole breast radiotherapy, and nowadays we are using accelerated partial breast irradiation, very short course of radiotherapy given over a 5 days period to a subset of patients. And some centers are also trying only one dose of intraoperative radiotherapy. So radiotherapy, remember, is an integral part of breast conservation therapy. And subsequently, these patients are subjected to systemic therapy, either chemotherapy, hormonal therapy, depending on the histopathology report and nodal status and other factors. Remember, If you want to do embark on a good breast conservation therapy program, it is a multidisciplinary approach. Surgeon is only a manager. He is not the leader. He is a manager. He should manage a different specialties, including radiation oncologist, medical oncologist, a good radiology and pathology. You need to have these 5 components if you want to do a successful BCT program. Coming to the indications, for sake of postgraduates, all stage 1 and 2 breast cancers, tumors less than 5 centimeter, are suitable for breast conservation. And the other factors you need to look into are availability of mammographic facilities, radiotherapy facilities, and good pathology and radiology services. And always remember reliability regarding treatment compliance and follow-up. The patient should be able to complete a radiotherapy and systemic therapy. Then only you offer breast conservation surgery. Contraindications for breast conservation. Majority of the conventional indications and contraindications of 80s are no longer valid. With the increasing experience, most of the contraindications which were there in 1980s are becoming emerging indications for breast conservation therapy. So as of today, in the current era, only 10 to 15% of patients are not suitable for breast conservation, and the absolute contraindications include a diffuse microcalcifications in the mammogram, multifocal or multicentric cancer not amenable for optimal breast conservation surgery, persistently positive margins. That means you attempt one BCS, margin positive, you do a second attempt, but still it's positive, then don't go ahead with breast conservation, you go for a mastectomy. And any history of prior chest wall radiotherapy is also a contraindication for breast conservation. Certain golden principles regarding incision planning for breast conservation. For tumors located in the upper half of the breast, avoid radial incisions. Always avoid radial incisions. Use either a circumarular, elliptical, or crescent-shaped incisions. I will show you some pictures. You get very good cosmesis. For a tumors located in the lower half, you always give a radial incision, inverted T, or reduction mammoplasty approach. Avoid radial incisions in the upper half. So these are various, every patient you need to individualize. You can see here for upper quadrant tumors, you give either a crescent-shaped incisions. These are the kind of incisions they heal well. In the lower quadrant, either you go for a radial or inverted T incisions, and you can achieve a nice cosmesis here. So when it comes to breast conservation, the surgeon always balances the extent of resection, cosmesis, and local recurrence. If the extent of resection is more, you get less local recurrence, but cosmesis is going to be bad. If the extent of resection is less, your cosmesis is going to be good, but your local recurrence is going to be high. So you need to balance this. So what a surgeon should do when you plan a good lumpectomy, if you see on the left side, this is how you need to remove the specimen. With the palpation guided assistance, you see you should keep at least a 1 centimeter gross margin around the tumor. And if you see a cross section of the tumor, this is how the specimen should look in a negative margin resection. So this should be the goal of a resection in breast conservation therapy. BCS is purely based on surgical skills and experience. Most of the breast conservations are done by palpation guided resections. Of course, there are new technologies coming up, intraoperative ultrasound, margin probes and all that. But a good experience, I think a lot of general surgeons, they have experience operating fibroadenomas, benign tumors, so they can easily practice doing a good margin negative lumpectomy for cancers. For non-palpable lesions, we recommend wire-guided localization or blow. The principle is you should maintain 1 centimeter gross margin, tumor-free margin of the specimen. Other important issue for the postgraduates is specimen orientation is very, very important. You use sutures for marking, or you can use inking of the specimens. So you should orient the specimen which is anterior, which is posterior, which is superior, which is inferior, for the sake of pathology, so that you will know which margin is positive or negative. So this has to be done by the surgeons. For margin assessment, in experienced centers, there is no need for routine frozen section or other technologies. But when you are starting your program, you can use frozen section. We use routinely at our center cavity shave. That means we take separate margins from the lumpectomy cavity. So what is the current criteria of margin negative resection? So there should not be ink on the invasive cancer, or DCIS. Is called a positive margin. That means it should be grossly free of tumor, the specimen. If there is a positive margin, there is a twofold increase in the ipsilateral breast tumor recurrence. And margin width is immaterial. Whether you take 1 centimeter or 2 centimeters, it is immaterial. Basically, it should not be grossly positive. Just remember that. this is histopathology. But when you operate, you should aim for 1 centimeter. In the histopathology, the margin should be grossly free of cancer. So the next question is, does BCT increases local recurrence? I have already showed you trials. The answer is no. There is a lot of big trials available currently. The local recurrence rates nowadays they are reporting is 1 to 3%. That's all. If you do a proper breast conservation therapy. And we have also our Indian data coming from Tata Memorial Hospital. We have published from AIMS. The local recurrence rates is around 4%. And survival, does it affect survival, breast conservation therapy compared to mastectomy? Now we have a huge study coming from California state, 112,000 patients, where they have shown the survival of breast conservation therapy is superior than mastectomy. If you select stage 1 and 2 patients, the survival is 5% superior in patients who had undergone breast conservation therapy. And psychological cosmetic advantages are very, very obvious. I don't have to explain. You see a patient of mastectomy on the left, and you see a patient of breast conservation therapy on the right. So there are obvious cosmetic and psychological advantages. So what are the new strategies for expanding breast conservation therapy? There are certain patients who are denied breast conservation because of the tumor size or poor tumor breast ratio, what we call, because it may lead to bad cosmetic outcomes. So two new strategies have come up in the last 10 years. So one is neoadjuvant chemotherapy or targeted therapy. We shrink the tumor, then go for breast conservation therapy. The second is breast oncoplasty. So use plastic surgical techniques to give better cosmetic outcomes. So we have basic types is volume displacement, volume replacement. I will not go into the details. This is a special topic of itself. It will take more than 30-40 minutes. So just remember, there are two new strategies. One is neoadjuvant chemo and targeted therapy to downstage the tumor, then offer breast conservation. Second is oncoplasty. So the first trial which has shown the feasibility of breast conservation therapy following neoadjuvant chemotherapy is the NSABP 18 study. There you see the last line in T3 tumors, that is means more than 5 centimeters. If we give neoadjuvant chemotherapy, breast conservation can be done in 20%, 22% of patients, whereas the BCS rate was 8% if you don't give NSET. Oncoplasties, yes, if you want to do a good cosmetic outcome, with a small breast, if you do a lumpectomy, the cosmetic outcomes are going to be bad. So you can use some flaps, like here we are showing a mini latissimus dorsi flap. We can use it, do a volume replacement, do a lumpectomy, and if you see on the right side, this is the post-operative outcome. So this patient is tumor-free and as well as got a good cosmetic outcome. So this is how we use different techniques for different patients. Coming to the final part of my presentation, our own experience at AIMS of breast conservation surgery. Till 90s, mastectomy was the most common procedure at AIMS. We started our breast conservation program in 1991. It took a while for it to take off. We started reconstructions in 1998, oncoplasty in 2005 we started, and neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by breast conservation in 2010. Just see here in the bottom line, in 1990 our breast conservation rates were only 5% at AIMS. Currently, we are touching almost 50% of breast conservation in early stage breast cancer patients. So the current surgical thought process at AIMS is every patient who comes to clinic, this is how we think. Can we avoid a mastectomy? Is an upfront BCS feasible? Is breast oncoplasty required? Are there any other options to increase BCS rates? Mastectomy, if you plan, then is there any feasibility of breast reconstruction? And see in the algorithm, mastectomy is our last option. So these are our breast conservation rates. The blue bars are breast conservations. The red bars are mastectomy. If you see from 90 to 2016, this data is up to 2016. Now breast conservation is almost 60 to 70% compared to mastectomy. This is how our graph took off. And these are our data. The margin positivity rate is 4%. And cosmetic outcomes, almost 80% we can achieve excellent to good cosmetic outcomes. And overall relapse rates are comparable. You see breast conservation with mastectomy, it's 13% each. So they are comparable. This is Indian data. And local relapse is around 3.7% in breast conservation. In mastectomy, it is touching 2%. So just to conclude, breast conservation therapy is the standard of care for early stage breast cancer. There's no doubt about it. Excellent long-term oncologic and cosmetic outcomes have already been proven all over the world. Neoadjuvant chemotherapy and oncoplasty can be utilized to expand breast conservation rates. low BCS rates in developing countries, there are multiple factors. So everybody should work, including the physicians. So the physician awareness should increase. Then they can counsel the patients, then offer breast conservation therapy to a higher number of patients. So there is a need to increase awareness and expertise for BCG among the surgical community. And the key to success, always remember, is a multidisciplinary approach. Thank you.
Sir, thank you very much, sir. Professor Dio, sir. Any questions from the chairpersons? Subbu? Chairpersons can decide whether to close the session or ask anything.
One question.
Nothing much. Always enjoy listening to SVS. He's somebody